The twin suns hung low over the crimson cliffs, bleeding light across the canyon like a slow spill of molten gold. The wind carried the scent of iron dust and burned resin from broken banners still fluttering along the ridge. Elias adjusted the strap on his shoulder and exhaled slowly, his breath catching with the grit in the air. His body ached from the climb, from the battle, from the absurdity of surviving yet another day on a world that did not want him. Before him stretched the remnants of the alien host, blue-skinned, tall, their eyes wide and glimmering like shards of dusk. They had stopped fighting. Not because he'd ordered it. Because of what he'd just done. He had touched her head. The moment replayed itself in his mind like an echo caught between cliffs. The alien woman had stood before him, taller by half a head, her armor cracked, her braids heavy with dust. She had lunged, blade raised high in defiance, and he, bloody, tired, stupidly human, had caught her by the wrist. She'd twisted, hissed something in her tongue, and for reasons he couldn't name, he'd done the unthinkable. He'd placed his hand gently atop her head, the way he used to calm the barn dogs back home. The gesture had been meant as mercy, a signal of peace. But it wasn't peace they saw, it was declaration. The entire canyon froze. Dozens of her warriors stared in silence. Then, like a single body breathing out, they dropped their weapons into the dust. Now they waited. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pull back, unwilling to disturb the tension. Elias looked at her again. Her crimson eyes were wide, disbelief and fury dancing within them. The sigil carved into her chest plate, two intersecting moons, gleamed faintly as if it, too, was stunned. She hadn't moved since the touch. Her mouth worked soundlessly, the words failing before they left her throat. Behind her, the ranks of blue-skinned soldiers knelt one by one, heads bowed. The gesture struck Elias like a hammer. He wasn't their savior. He was something worse, an intruder who had broken a sacred boundary he didn't even understand. He wanted to step back, to apologize, to say something that would make this all make sense. But the eyes of an entire people were on him now. He could feel them, watching, judging, waiting. He swallowed hard, dust scratching his throat, and muttered under his breath, "You've really done it this time, Eli." The alien woman blinked, her expression softening for a heartbeat. Then she took a step forward, her voice low but sharp enough to cut stone. "You touched me," she said in accented standard. The words were shaky, as if they hurt her to speak. Elias nodded, unsure if he was supposed to answer or stay silent. "I didn't mean disrespect," he said carefully. "Where I'm from, it's a sign of," she interrupted with a bitter laugh that startled her own soldiers. "A sign. It is a sentence." The translation unit embedded in his collar struggled to keep up, flickering light along his jawline. "Sentence," he repeated, not trusting his ears. She straightened to her full height. "The hand of another upon the head of a chief means the spirits have turned from her. I am UN crowned." Her voice cracked on the last word. Around them, murmurs began to ripple through the kneeling warriors, a slow chant carried by disbelief. Elias's gut turned cold. He wanted to deny it, to explain, but what could he say? He hadn't meant to ruin her. He just wanted the killing to stop. The alien woman drew a trembling breath and lowered her head, not in submission, but in calculation. "The clan will choose again," she said, her gaze flicking toward the crowd behind her. "Until then, they are yours." The translation lagged just enough for Elias to blink in confusion. "Mine," he said, pointing to himself. "No, no, no, I don't," but the warriors were already rising, slowly, reverently, facing him. The first in line, a tall male with jagged scars along his neck, slammed the butt of his spear into the ground and bowed. Then another did. Then another. The sound of half-striking stone grew into a rhythm that filled the canyon like a drumbeat of thunder. Elias felt the air vibrate through his ribs. The alien woman looked at him with something like despair. "You have claimed us," she whispered. He stepped back again, panic clawing up his spine. "Wait. No. That's not, I'm not claiming anyone." But his words were swallowed by the chant. The warriors struck their spears again and again, the rhythm echoing up the canyon walls. The dust rose in clouds, turning the sunset into a storm of red light. Elias turned in place, searching for some authority to correct this madness, but he was the only human for miles. His ship, half buried in the ravine below, was a smoking ruin. His team was gone. The transmission beacon had died hours ago. He was alone. Alone, except for the hundreds of alien warriors who now thought he was their chosen leader. The woman's name came to him suddenly. He remembered hearing it shouted earlier in the fight. Kara, he said, his voice uncertain. She flinched at the sound, as though the name itself were an insult from human lips. What do I do now? He asked. The question hung between them, absurd in its simplicity. Kara looked at him for a long, unreadable moment, then turned toward the horizon. The canyon stretched far into the desert, where banners of other clans fluttered in the distance. You lead, she said. Or you die with us. Then she began to walk, her armor glinting faintly with every step, the crowd parting to let her pass. Elias stood motionless, the weight of her words pressing on his chest. He could feel the exhaustion settling into his bones like a slow frost. The world tilted slightly under his feet, heat stroke or shock, maybe both. He'd spent 6 months trying to negotiate with these people, 3 days fighting them, and less than a heartbeat accidentally dethroning their leader. He wondered what his commander back on the ship would have said if he could see this. Probably something like, "Good work, Captain. You just invented a new form of diplomacy. Touch someone, become their god." The laughter that escaped his lips surprised even him. It was dry, hollow, but real. When he looked back up, the chanting had stopped. Kara's warriors were watching him expectantly, waiting for instruction. Elias felt his throat tighten. "Right," he said quietly. "Guess I'd better not mess this up." He took a cautious step forward, then another, the eyes of hundreds tracking his every move. The canyon floor glowed orange in the dying light, and for a moment he imagined his boots leaving prints that would last centuries after he was gone. The thought both humbled and terrified him. Night came fast on this world. The two suns dropped below the horizon almost together, leaving a deep violet sky streaked with dust trails from the earlier battle. Fires were lit along the ridge, casting flickering shadows across alien faces painted with ash and blood. Elias sat apart, near the broken remains of his landing pod, watching the metal cool. He tried to piece together what he knew about Kara's people, the Thalran, they called themselves. Tribal, hierarchical, fiercely territorial. Their culture revolved around honor duels and spirit oaths tied to bloodlines. Touching a chief's head, apparently, was worse than killing one. And somehow, he had done it in front of her entire army. A rustle behind him made him turn. Kara stood at the edge of the firelight, her expression unreadable. She had stripped away parts of her armor, revealing blue skin marred by streaks of dried blood and ceremonial ink. "You should eat," she said, tossing him a piece of charred meat wrapped in leaves. He caught it clumsily. "Thanks," he said, though he wasn't sure if it was safe for him to eat Thalran food. She sat down opposite him, silent for a while, her red eyes reflecting the flames. Finally, she spoke. "You are not like the others. The ones who came before burned villages. Took heads. You talk instead." He shrugged. "Didn't get me very far." She tilted her head. "Farther than fire." They sat in uneasy quiet, the crackle of the fire filling the space between their words. Elias studied her face, the faint luminescence along her temples, the subtle twitch in her jaw when she swallowed. She looked younger than he'd first thought, maybe his age. "You could take it back," he said after a while. "The leadership. Tell them I didn't mean anything by it." Kara's gaze didn't waver. They saw. The spirits saw. "I am fallen. If I fight it, I am cursed." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but something in her eyes betrayed grief. "And what about you?" he asked softly. "What happens to the guy who accidentally dethrones a warlord?" She gave a humorless smile. "You lead. Or you die." The same words as before, but quieter now. Almost gentle. Elias rubbed his temples, feeling the exhaustion pull at the edges of his vision. "I don't want to lead anyone," he murmured. "I just want to get home." Kara looked into the fire. "Then you must survive the choosing." He frowned. "The what?" She stood, her silhouette framed by firelight and the vast canyon beyond. "At dawn," she said, "they will test you. If the spirits favor you, you remain. If not," she didn't finish. She didn't need to. The night wind howled softly through the cliffs, carrying the weight of her unfinished sentence. Elias stared into the flames, his mind racing through every possible way to survive a ritual he didn't understand. When dawn came, the Thalren gathered in the canyon floor, their chants low and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Elias stood barefoot in the dust, stripped of his jacket, facing a circle of warriors. Kara watched from the edge, her face unreadable. The rising suns painted the cliffs in gold and blood. Elias's hands trembled slightly, but he steadied them by curling his fingers into fists. Whatever this test was, he had no choice but to face it. He had started something that could not be undone. The first warrior stepped forward, spear gleaming, eyes bright with challenge. Elias met his gaze and exhaled. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. The drums began. The first spear came fast, cutting the air with a whistle that split the silence. Elias ducked on instinct, feeling the wind shear past his ear, the weapon burying itself into the dust behind him with a heavy thud. The circle of Thalren warriors around him murmured approval, a low pulse of sound that felt more alive than the wind itself. The second warrior stepped forward, taller, younger, eyes burning with challenge. He held a curved blade that shimmered faintly with heat, its surface rippling like sunlight on water. Elias exhaled and raised his hands. "Okay," he muttered under his breath, "we're doing this the old-fashioned way." He moved awkwardly at first, boots slipping in the loose red sand. The Thalren fought like dancers, fluid, precise, deadly. His body still carried the stiffness of gravity, of human training drilled in linear motion. But desperation taught faster than any academy. The blade came low, Elias sidestepped, his hand catching the warrior's wrist. He twisted, letting the alien's momentum carry through, and the warrior hit the ground hard, breath knocked from his lungs. The crowd gasped, not at the move itself, but at the audacity of a human laying hands on one of their own again. Elias stepped back, panting. He didn't want to kill anyone. He didn't even want to fight. But survival didn't care what he wanted. The fallen Thalren rose slowly, tapping his chest twice in acknowledgement. Elias hesitated, unsure if it was thanks or a promise of vengeance. The next opponent didn't wait. She lunged with twin daggers, her movements faster than anything he'd ever seen. Elias barely managed to parry one with the shaft of a broken spear he'd picked up. Metal screamed against alien alloy. She spun, low, slicing the air by his ribs. He rolled aside, dust blinding him. When he rose, blood ran warm along his forearm where the blade had grazed him. The watching warriors shouted in their tongue, their voices echoing up the canyon walls. Elias gritted his teeth and charged before he could think better of it. It wasn't skill that saved him, it was instinct. He slammed his shoulder into her chest, throwing them both off balance. They crashed into the dust, her daggers spinning away. Before she could recover, he pinned her arm, pressing his knee against her wrist. The silence that followed was unbearable. He could feel her breath against his face, smell the strange metallic tang of her skin. Slowly, carefully, he released her and stood. She lay still for a moment, then nodded once, acknowledgement again, maybe respect. Elias's pulse pounded in his ears. He turned toward the crowd, waiting for the next challenge. But none came. The circle parted. Kara stepped forward. She wasn't armored now. She wore ceremonial bands across her forearms, each etched with sigils of her lineage, her skin streaked with new markings painted in ash. The crowd hushed as she entered the circle. Her eyes glowed faintly red beneath the rising suns. "The test is not over," she said softly. The words were not for him but for the spirits, or for the warriors watching from the cliffs above. Elias's stomach knotted. "You said I had to face them," he said, voice low. "You didn't say anything about you." Kara drew a short spear from her back and planted its tip into the sand. "A leader must prove worth. You took my place. You face me now." Elias wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't anger anymore. It was grief wrapped in duty. The kind that would consume her if she didn't see this through. He understood it because he'd worn that same look when he buried his crew after the crash. "If I fight you," he said slowly, "and I win, what happens to you?" She tilted her head. "Then the spirits have chosen. I serve." He almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but her tone left no room for disbelief. She wasn't joking. The warriors around them chanted low, rhythmic, ancient. Kara raised her spear. The air seemed to tighten. The first exchange was lightning. Her strike came high, then low, each movement a blur of trained grace. Elias blocked the first, barely dodged the second, and countered with a desperate shove that she turned into a spin, knocking him sideways. He hit the ground, sand filling his mouth, ribs screaming. When he looked up, she was already circling him, her spear poised like a serpent. He rolled to avoid the next blow, grabbed a handful of dust, and threw it toward her face. She blinked once, unfazed. "You fight dirty," she said. "I fight to live," he grunted, catching the shaft of her spear and twisting. They grappled like storm and stone, every movement fueled by exhaustion and something deeper, a strange thread of connection neither could name. She was stronger, faster, but he was stubborn in ways that defied reason. Every time she knocked him down, he got back up. Every time she drew blood, he smiled through it. And somewhere in that defiance, something shifted. The crowd's chants faltered. Kara's rhythm broke. She hesitated for half a breath, and in that moment, he stepped inside her guard, hand catching her wrist again. For a heartbeat, they stood locked together, eyes inches apart, breaths mingling in the dry air. And then, without thinking, he did it again. He rested his hand on her head. This time, there was no gasp, no chant, just stillness. The suns climbed higher, burning the dust to gold. Kara's spear slipped from her hand and fell soundlessly between them. Her eyes widened, but the fury was gone. She looked up at him as if seeing something new, something she hadn't believed could exist. Then she lowered her gaze, knelt slowly in the dust, and pressed her palm to the ground. The crowd followed. Hundreds of warriors bowed as one, the sound of their armor shifting like waves against stone. Elias's throat tightened. He hadn't wanted this. But denying it now would dishonor her. Kara spoke softly, voice trembling. "The spirits have spoken." Elias looked down at her, his hand still hovering uselessly above her head. "Kara," he began, but she shook her head. "Do not speak. They will hear." She rose then, turning to face her people. Her voice carried across the canyon, clear and strong. "By the sign of touch, the old path ends. The new path begins." The warriors struck their weapons against the ground once in unison, the sound rolling like thunder. Elias stood frozen, the weight of an entire culture settling on his shoulders. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny part of him wondered if he'd just doomed them all. Later, when the crowd dispersed, Kara found him near the canyon's edge. The suns painted long shadows between the cliffs. "They will follow you now," she said quietly, "until the mountain spirits test you again." Elias rubbed his face. "I don't want followers. I just want to fix my beacon and get off this rock." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You cannot leave yet. The clans of the West march. They will come for us before nightfall." He blinked. "Wait, more enemies?" She nodded. 3,000 strong. "They seek blood for what happened here." Elias sighed, laughing without humor. "Of course they do." Kara placed a hand on his arm, hesitant, uncertain. "You have a choice," she said. "Flee now, or stand with us. If you go, they will hunt us until none remain." He looked at her, at the faint scars tracing her collarbone, the defiance still flickering beneath her calm. "You still trust me?" he asked. "No," she said simply. "But the spirits do." He smiled at that despite himself. "Then let's give them a show." By nightfall, the canyon transformed into a fortress. Fires lined the ridges, casting eerie light over the preparations. Elias moved among the Thalren, lending his human eye to their defenses, redirecting choke points, reinforcing narrow paths with spiked barricades, teaching them to angle shields for deflection instead of brute endurance. Kara watched him from a distance, saying little but observing everything. When the drums began again, low and distant, she joined him at the edge. "They come," she said. Elias could already see them, a line of torches stretching across the desert like a serpent of fire. "How many?" he asked. "Too many," she replied. He tightened the straps on his vest, checked the crude energy cell strapped to his wrist, his last working piece of tech. "Guess we make it count," he said. Kara handed him a blade, alien forged and heavy. A chief must stand at the front, she said. He took it, meeting her gaze. Then let's hope I don't fall too fast. She gave the smallest smile, then turned to rally her warriors. The air trembled with tension. Elias felt it deep in his bones, the kind of stillness before catastrophe. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of ozone and dust. He drew a slow breath and looked toward the approaching army. Somewhere in the chaos of light, he saw reflections of his own kind, humans among them, mercenaries or deserters. It made his stomach twist. He wasn't just fighting aliens now. He was fighting pieces of home. The first volley of arrows lit the sky. Elias shouted orders he didn't know he knew. The Thalran moved with eerie precision, raising shields, their glowing eyes fierce behind dust and firelight. The arrows struck and shattered harmlessly against angled bronze. Kara leapt into the fray with her spear, her movements a blur of fury and grace. Elias followed, blade in hand, every muscle screaming. The clash of battle consumed the canyon, metal on metal, voices on wind, the dull roar of bodies colliding in waves. He fought not as a commander but as a survivor, every motion an answer to the chaos around him. When his arm gave out, he switched hands. When his knees buckled, he rose again. Somewhere in the madness, Kara's voice cut through, calling orders, anchoring him to the world. Hours passed, or minutes, time lost meaning. When silence finally fell, it was heavier than sound. The sands were littered with bodies, the fires dimming. Elias stood in the center of it all, blade hanging at his side, chest heaving. Kara approached, limping slightly, her spear cracked but her eyes alive. She looked at him for a long moment, then touched her chest in salute. "The spirits favor you," she said. He wanted to argue, to deny it, but the exhaustion swallowed his words. He nodded instead. Around them, the surviving Thalran began to chant again, not in triumph, but in reverence. Elias felt something shift deep inside him, a fragile bond sealing itself between human and alien. When the first light of dawn touched the cliffs, Kara stood beside him in silence. "You bleed," she said softly. He glanced down, surprised at the red spreading along his side. "Guess I do," he muttered. She looked at the blood for a long time, then whispered, "Red, the color of new chiefs." Elias blinked, unsure if she was serious or poetic. "Let's just call it the color of idiots," he said with a faint grin. Kara didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "The clans will come again. But now they will know you. They will fear you." Elias stared out across the battlefield, where the wind was already erasing footprints. "I don't want them to fear me," he said. "Then teach them," she replied, "what it means to follow a human." The words lingered in the air like prophecy. The dawn wind carried a quiet that felt unnatural after the night's carnage. It wasn't peace, just the hollow breath between storms. Elias stood on a ridge overlooking the canyon, his arm bound in pale Thalran fabric that shimmered faintly in the rising light. Below him, the survivors moved like shadows through the wreckage, stacking broken spears and gathering the wounded. Kara walked among them, silent and composed, her armor cracked and her expression unreadable. She didn't look at him once. That distance between them felt heavier than any wound. Elias turned his gaze eastward, where the horizon stretched toward dunes veined with red stone. Somewhere out there, he knew, other clans were preparing. The Thalran weren't one people, they were hundreds of tribes bound loosely by ritual, and he'd just fractured their old order by accident. He thought about home, about the quiet hills of earth, the smell of wet grass after rain. It felt like a dream belonging to another man. Here, in this dust-red world, he was no diplomat, no explorer. He was something else now, something none of them had words for. Footsteps approached behind him. Kara stopped at his side, arms folded. "They speak of you already," she said. "Some call you Ghost Chief. Others say you are cursed." Elias let out a tired breath. "Guess I can't please everyone." She looked at him sideways. "You misunderstand. For my people, cursed and chosen are the same thing." The corner of his mouth twitched. "That explains a lot." Kara didn't laugh, but her voice softened slightly. "The clans will come. They always come when balance breaks. You've broken it, human." He glanced at her, searching her face. "Then we fix it. Together." She studied him for a moment, then shook her head. You speak as if choice still lives here. You cannot fix what the spirits have already decided. Elias turned back toward the rising suns. Then maybe it's time someone questioned your spirits. She didn't reply. The silence that followed wasn't hostile, it was weary. Like two people who had both lost too much to argue. By midday, scouts returned with grim news. 3 banners had been sighted moving through the desert, the western clans, larger than before. The Thalran murmured prayers as the news spread. Elias listened, then gathered what remained of his officers, Kara, the scarred warrior Tarek, and a quiet seer named Lanai who carried a staff carved from bones. They met near the smoldering wreck of his landing pod. The air smelled of ash and ozone. We can't win another stand, Elias said plainly. They'll crush us before sunset. Tarek slammed his fist against his chest. Then we die well. Elias shook his head. No. You die for nothing. They're expecting a fortress defense. We give them something else. Kara's eyes narrowed. What are you planning? He crouched, drawing rough shapes in the dust. Your canyon here, it's a funnel. They come through the narrows, expecting to meet our line. We'll draw them in, make them think we're breaking, then collapse the walls. Tarek frowned. Collapse the stone. Impossible. Elias met his gaze. Not if we use the engines. The group fell silent. The broken hull of his ship still rested in the ravine below, its reactor buried but not dead. If we reroute the power cells and plant them along the fissure, Elias continued, we can trigger a chain reaction. The cliffs will come down. Trap their vanguard before they reach the basin. Kara studied him carefully. And how many of us die in this clever plan? He hesitated. If we do it right, less than all. The dry humor didn't land. She stepped closer. And who lights your fire? Elias's jaw tightened. I will. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lanai's eyes glowed faintly in the sun's reflection. The spirits hunger for balance, she murmured. Perhaps they have already chosen the hand to deliver it. Elias stood. Then it settled. Kara's voice was quiet when she finally spoke. You do not know our ways, human. If you die, the bond between clan and spirit breaks again. We become lost. Elias looked at her, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. You won't be lost. You'll be free. They worked through the afternoon. Thalran warriors hauled cables and shattered engine coils up the ridge while Elias and Kara coordinated from the canyon floor. Every hiss of escaping vapor reminded him how unstable the cells were. One wrong step, one spark, and the canyon would become a crater. He caught Kara watching him often, her expression unreadable, a mixture of curiosity and anger. At one point, when a charge failed to ignite, he slammed his fist into the rock in frustration. She approached quietly. You curse the machine, she said. On my world, that's called maintenance, he replied. For the first time since they'd met, her lips curved, barely. Perhaps your world was kinder. As dusk approached, the horizon burned with the light of approaching torches. The enemy was near. The Thalran warriors gathered on the ridge, silent, weapons gleaming in the amber light. Elias stood beside Kara, checking the detonator strapped to his wrist. When they reach the markers, he said, signal me. She nodded, then hesitated. If this fails, we will die before the sun set. He smiled faintly. Then let's make it a beautiful sunset. The first wave came like a storm of noise, shouting, drums, the clatter of armor. Dust rose in clouds, blotting out the light. The Thalran held the line just long enough to bait them deeper. Arrows streaked overhead. Spears clashed. The air filled with heat and motion. Kara fought at the front, her movements precise and deadly, her voice cutting through the chaos as she shouted commands. Elias stayed near the ridge, eyes fixed on the advancing columns below. The markers glowed faintly along the canyon walls. He exhaled slowly, thumb hovering over the trigger. Then he saw them, human soldiers among the enemy ranks, their armor bearing the insignia of the Colonial Trade Authority. His own people. They had come to finish what diplomacy couldn't. His hand trembled. The detonator's light blinked steady blue. Damn it, he whispered. If he triggered it now, he'd be killing humans too. But if he didn't, the Thalran would fall. Kara's voice echoed faintly over the roar. Now, Elias. He froze. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to save them, but his mind splintered between loyalties. Then he saw Kara fall, an arrow striking her shoulder, her body twisting to the ground. That broke the hesitation. He hit the trigger. The world erupted. The explosion ripped through the canyon like a god's heartbeat. Fire blossomed beneath the cliffs, roaring upward in pillars of dust and light. The ground convulsed, throwing warriors from their feet. Elias hit the dirt hard, his ears ringing, vision blinding white. When he staggered up, half the canyon had collapsed, burying the advancing army beneath tons of stone. The air shimmered with heat. His wrist display flickered, then died. For a long moment, there was only the sound of falling rocks and distant screams fading into silence. Kara lay a few meters away, pinned under debris. Elias stumbled toward her, dragging himself through the dust. He pushed the slab aside with shaking arms and helped her sit up. Blood ran down her arm, but her eyes burned bright. She looked past him at the devastation, her lips parting in awe. You moved the mountains. Elias laughed weakly. Yeah. My mother always said I was stubborn. She blinked at him, confused by the joke but smiling faintly nonetheless. Around them, the Thalran survivors began to emerge, their faces streaked with ash. They looked from the broken cliffs to Elias, and then one by one, they knelt. Kara watched them with a strange, pained pride. They will remember this day, she said softly. They will sing it when the suns burn out. Elias shook his head. Sing it wrong, probably. She touched his shoulder lightly. That is how stories live. Night fell slower this time, as if the world itself was reluctant to let go. Fires burned low, casting ghostly light on the wounded and the sleeping. Elias sat beside Kara, who rested against a stone, her arm bound tightly. You should sleep, she said. He smirked. You first. She tilted her head. Your kind does not believe in spirits, do you? We believe in cause and effect, he replied. Push something hard enough, it moves. No gods required. She was silent for a moment. And yet you moved mountains. He looked at her, unsure how to answer. Maybe she was right. Maybe this place was changing him in ways he couldn't see yet. You could have left, she said quietly. You had chance before battle. Why stay? He met her gaze. Because I started this. And because I couldn't let you face it alone. Her eyes softened. You speak like one of us. He smiled faintly. Maybe I'm cursed too. She laughed then, a small, honest sound that cut through the darkness. They talked until the fires dimmed. Kara told him about her world before the wars, about the songs her mother sang to the river spirits, about the great migration through the red storms. Elias listened, imagining a civilization built on faith instead of science, bound by ritual but not cruelty. When she asked about Earth, he hesitated. It's quieter, he said finally. Too many walls. Not enough sky. She nodded slowly. Perhaps that is why you fly. As the night deepened, a cold wind swept through the canyon, carrying the scent of stone and ozone. Elias leaned back against the rock, exhaustion finally winning. Kara's voice grew softer. Tomorrow, the clans will see smoke. They will know the West has fallen. They will come to parley, or to avenge. He opened his eyes halfway. Which do you think? She smiled faintly. Both. When sleep came, it was dreamless and heavy. He woke before dawn to the sound of distant horns. Kara stood already in armor, the glow of her eyes fierce again. They come, she said. He pushed himself upright, bones protesting. How many this time? All, she replied simply. He laughed under his breath. Then I guess we better make friends fast. She looked at him curiously. You would parley. If they'll listen, he said. If not, I'll find another way. Kara studied him for a long moment, then stepped close enough that he could see the faint pattern of veins glowing beneath her skin. If you die, she said softly, I will tell them you fought with honor. Elias smiled tiredly. Tell them I fought with bad luck. She didn't smile back. Instead, she pressed something into his hand, a small stone carved with 2 interlocking circles. "It is a spirit mark," she said. "So you are never alone between worlds." He turned it over in his palm. "Thanks. Guess that means I'm officially cursed now." Her expression softened. "No. It means you are one of us." He slipped the stone into his pocket and looked toward the horizon, where new banners were already rising against the sun. For the first time, the fear didn't come. Only resolve. "Then let's go meet your gods," he said quietly. The horizon burned red with dust and banners. The dawn light made the desert shimmer like molten glass as the clans of the east marched toward the ruined canyon. Elias stood beside Kara at the ridge's edge, the warm wind tugging at his torn clothes, his arm still bound where the explosion had cut him. Below them, the Thauran survivors formed ranks, fewer than 200 now, but standing straight, eyes bright, silent as carved stone. The air thrummed with tension, the kind that made even the suns seem hesitant to rise higher. Kara's voice was calm when she spoke. "They will not talk first. You must." Elias swallowed, watching the army approach. He had seen battlefields before, but this was different. These weren't faceless enemies, they were living fragments of a world older than his own, painted in ritual and belief. He turned toward her. "You really think words can stop this?" She looked at him steadily. "No. But words may delay it long enough for something greater to choose." He nodded, though he didn't know what that something could be. "Guess I'll have to improvise again." Kara adjusted the strap of her armor, her face unreadable. "If you fail, they will kill you first. Then they will kill us. Speak well, Ghost Chief." The armies halted a short distance away, dust swirling around their front ranks. A figure broke from the formation, a tall warrior draped in obsidian plates, his helmet crowned with bone crests. He carried a staff carved with runes that pulsed faintly with blue fire. The crowd behind him knelt as he approached. Kara whispered, "That is Sereth, war chief of the East. He ruled before my time." Elias nodded once, stepping forward. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced his feet to move. The wind howled between the cliffs, carrying the faint rattle of armor. When they met halfway between armies, Sereth's expression was carved from iron. "You are the one who broke the Western Covenant," Sereth said, his voice deep and echoing through the translation unit like thunder underwater. Elias straightened. "If by broke you mean stopped them from burning this valley to glass, yeah, that was me." Murmurs rippled through the watching ranks. Sereth tilted his head. "You speak boldly for one not chosen by the spirits." Elias took a breath. "I didn't ask to be chosen. But your people already decided that when they laid down their weapons." Sereth's eyes narrowed. "You touched a chief's head. That is blasphemy." Elias met his gaze evenly. "Maybe. But tell me, how many of your chiefs have died keeping your people divided while humans tear the ground beneath your feet for or you don't even use?" Sereth's grip on the staff tightened. "You presume much for a wanderer." Elias took a step closer. "I've seen your dead. I've seen your mountains burned because of deals your high priests made with my kind. You fight each other while they strip your world clean. You want to honor your spirits. Start by protecting what's left." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. For a moment, Elias thought he'd gone too far. Then Kara stepped forward, voice clear. "He speaks truth. The mountain passes are scarred. The humans of the sky burned the river fields. Sereth, I have seen it with my own eyes." The elder chief looked at her, a flicker of sorrow passing across his stern features. "Kara of the moons. You fell from grace." "I was pushed," she said quietly, "by the will of something larger." Sereth studied them both, the blue fire in his staff dimming. "You would unite us under this offworlder." Kara lowered her gaze. "Under the spirit's sign." Elias spoke before Sereth could answer. "You don't have to follow me. You just have to stop killing each other long enough to survive." The chief turned away, staring toward the ruined cliffs. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then he lowered his staff slowly into the dust. "Your words are heavy. The old laws cannot hold in the shadow of such change. If the spirits truly chose you, prove it." Elias frowned. How? Sereth gestured toward the east, where the desert stretched into haze. The hollow cradle. The place where the first Thalran rose from sand and sky. There lies the spirit core. Touch it and live, and we will know your claim is true. Elias hesitated. And if I don't? Then your body will feed the dunes, Sereth said simply. The warriors around them struck their spears once into the earth in solemn rhythm. The sound rolled through the canyon like a heartbeat. Kara looked at Elias, her expression unreadable. The cradle is sacred, she whispered. None who were not born Thalran have ever walked there. He turned to her. Guess I'll be the first. By nightfall they began the journey east. The canyon fell behind them, replaced by vast dunes that shimmered under twin moons. The warriors traveled in silence, their footsteps leaving faint trails that the wind erased almost immediately. Elias walked beside Kara, the faint blue light of her markings their only guide. She glanced at him occasionally, as though expecting him to collapse or flee. He didn't. The weight of purpose steadied him. The spirit core, whatever it was, might hold the answer to ending this madness or at least proving he wasn't just some cursed accident. As they camped beneath an arch of stone that glowed faintly with crystalline veins, Elias studied the warriors. They ate in ritual order, facing the wind, whispering prayers that rose and fell like waves. Kara sat apart, cleaning her weapon. You don't believe in this, do you? He asked. She didn't look up. Belief is for those who still hope. I have only duty. He smiled faintly. That's belief in disguise. She paused, eyes lifting to his. You speak like my mother. She said the same before she walked into the storm. Elias hesitated. What happened? She never returned, Kara said quietly. The elders said she sought the core to save our people. The spirits rejected her. Elias looked into the fire. Maybe she just didn't have anyone to pull her back. Kara didn't answer. The silence between them was gentle this time, not heavy. The next day brought the storm. It came without warning, sweeping across the dunes like a wall of living glass. The Thalran dropped to their knees, anchoring spears into the ground, cloaks drawn tight. Elias followed suit, covering his face as shards of burning sand tore through the air. He could barely see Kara's outline through the chaos, her form glowing faintly blue in the storm's fury. When it passed, half the warriors were missing, swallowed by the desert. Kara rose slowly, dust coating her hair. The cradle is near, she said. The desert tests all who seek it. Elias spat grit from his mouth. Remind me to leave better Yelp reviews for alien pilgrimages. She frowned, not understanding, but smiled anyway. By twilight, they reached it. The hollow cradle was a vast depression in the earth, a bowl carved by ancient wind and heat. At its center stood a formation of black stone spiraling upward like frozen smoke. Faint light pulsed within, deep and slow, like the heartbeat of the planet. Elias felt the hairs on his arms rise. That's the spirit core, he asked. Kara nodded. It holds memory of our ancestors, our wars, our creation. It will know you. He exhaled, stepping forward. Let's hope it's feeling forgiving. The descent was steep. The air grew colder the closer he got, filled with a low hum that vibrated in his bones. When he reached the base, the stone's surface shimmered, reflecting ghostly images of faces, human, Thalran, others he didn't recognize. He raised his hand. All right, he murmured. If you're listening, I could use a sign. When his palm touched the stone, the world vanished. He stood in darkness filled with echoes, whispers of 1,000 voices speaking in harmony, a song older than words. Images flared like lightning, oceans boiling, cities of glass crumbling, blue-skinned figures kneeling before fire. A human face appeared among them, his own reflection, fractured by light. Who are you? The voices asked, layered and vast. Elias swallowed. No one special. Just someone trying to clean up his own mess. The light pulsed brighter. Why do you fight for those not your kind? He hesitated. Because I've seen what happens when we stop. The silence that followed was immense. Then the voices shifted, soft and distant. You are not chosen. You are remembered. He frowned. What does that mean? But the light consumed him before he could ask again. When he woke, he was lying on the sand, Kara's face above him, her hand pressed against his chest. "Elias," she said sharply. "Breathe." He gasped, air flooding back into his lungs. Around them, the core glowed brighter than before, beams of blue light reaching into the sky. The Thalren fell to their knees, chanting his name. Kara stared, awe and fear mixing in her eyes. "You touched it. And it lived." Elias sat up slowly, head spinning. "It said I'm remembered." She looked confused. "Remembered by what?" He shook his head. "Didn't say." The ground trembled softly beneath them, as if the world itself was exhaling. From the light of the core, spectral figures began to rise, Thalren ancestors, their forms woven from mist and fire. They bowed toward Elias, then toward Kara. The lead spirit spoke in a voice that made the air vibrate. "Balance returns when blood and breath walk together." Kara fell to her knees. "The spirits, bless union." The spirit turned its gaze toward Elias. "The divide ends where hands meet." Then the vision faded, the core dimming once more. Kara looked at him, shaken. "They chose both of us." He managed a tired smile. "Guess we're co-chiefs now." She didn't laugh. "Do not joke. This changes everything." They climbed from the cradle under a sky streaked with violet. The warriors greeted them in silence, eyes wide with reverence. Elias glanced at Kara. "So what now?" She looked toward the distant canyon. "Now we return. And teach them what it means to follow a human and a fallen chief." As they began the long walk back, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain, a smell this world had not known in years. The desert clouds gathered slowly above the horizon, heavy with promise. Kara glanced upward. "It rains when the spirits rejoice." Elias looked up too, watching the first drops fall onto the red sand. "Then let's give them more to celebrate." The rain came in silver curtains that turned the dust into steam. Elias had never seen rain on this world before. It fell in slanted sheets, hissing against the stone, soaking the parched dunes until they bled color into the ground. The Thalren walked wordlessly through it, faces lifted toward the sky as if daring the gods to take it back. Kara moved beside him, her armor streaked dark with water, her eyes reflecting every flash of lightning. The air smelled alive for the first time since he'd crashed here, the petrichor mixing with the tang of alien ozone. Elias couldn't decide if it was cleansing the world or warning of something larger still to come. By the time they reached the canyon again, the rain had softened into mist. The fires from the previous battles were gone, replaced by rivers cutting through what had been dust. Where corpses once lay, new growth shimmered faintly, small mosses awakening from long dormancy. The Thalren stopped at the ridge and knelt, murmuring words Elias couldn't understand. He felt out of place again, an intruder in someone else's sacred moment, but Kara reached out, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "The rain remembers," she said. "It comes only for those the world forgives." He looked at her, rain dripping from his hair. "You think the world forgives me?" "No," she said softly. "But it forgives itself through you." They descended into the basin, where Sereth and the eastern warriors waited. The old chief's armor gleamed like black glass, his staff grounded into the wet earth. The light from the spirit core still lingered faintly across the horizon, a reminder of what they had witnessed. As Elias approached, the clans bowed, not in submission, but acknowledgement. Sereth's voice was deep, but no longer hard. The spirit spoke through storm and stone. "We saw their fire touch the sky. The divide ends." He turned his gaze to Kara. "The fallen rises." Then to Elias. "And the outsider walks among us as equal." Elias didn't know what to say. He had no speech prepared for this moment, no plan, no strategy, only exhaustion and awe. "I didn't come here to lead," he said finally. "I came to stop a war." Sereth inclined his head. "Then lead by ending it." Kara stepped forward, her voice carrying through the rain. "The clans will follow the spirit's sign. We will bind ourselves under one name again." The crowd murmured, the sound like wind across the dunes. Elias felt the weight of their eyes and wondered if peace could truly survive long in a world built on ritual. But when Kara looked at him, her expression calm and resolute, something in him steadied. Maybe it didn't have to last forever. Maybe it just had to start here. That night, the Thalren held what they called the renewal, a ceremony to mark the union of clans. Fires ringed the canyon, reflecting off the wet stone like living stars. Music rose from instruments carved of bone and crystal, deep and resonant, threading through the steady rhythm of drums. Elias sat near the largest fire, wrapped in a cloak of woven reeds and fabric that smelled faintly of smoke. Kara stood at the center of the gathering, her hands raised as she spoke to her people in their language. Her voice rose and fell like a song, the cadence mesmerizing. Though he couldn't understand the words, he felt their weight, the grief, the defiance, the hope. When she finished, she turned toward him. "The people ask you to speak, Elias." He blinked. What could I possibly say to them? She smiled faintly. "Whatever truth your spirit carries." He stood slowly, the firelight painting his face in gold and shadow. Hundreds of eyes watched him. The words came halting at first, then steadier as he spoke. "Back home, we have a saying, we inherit the world from our children, not our ancestors. I didn't understand it until I came here. We build things, destroy things, rebuild them again, but every time we do, we forget to ask what comes after us. Maybe the spirits didn't choose me because I'm human. Maybe they chose because I'm stupid enough to keep trying even when I shouldn't." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, brief but real. He continued, voice rough. "If I've learned anything here, it's that survival isn't strength. It's memory. You remember who you were, you remember who you lost, and somehow, you keep walking. That's all any of us can do. So walk forward. Together." When he sat, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of something sacred, something shared. Kara nodded once, her expression unreadable but her eyes soft. "You speak like the old spirits," she said quietly. "They were fools too." He smiled. "Good company, then." As the ceremony continued, Elias slipped away to the canyon's edge. The moons reflected on the water below, turning the surface into molten silver. He stared into it, lost in the shifting light, until he heard soft footsteps behind him. Kara joined him, her cloak drawn close against the wind. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said, "You could leave now. The beacon is repaired. Seretha's engineers rebuilt it from your wreckage." He nodded. "Yeah. I saw it earlier." She studied him. "And yet you stay." He took a slow breath. "Because I don't know where home is anymore." Kara's gaze didn't waver. "Your stars still wait above you." He looked up. "Do they? Or do they just watch?" The rain had stopped, but the air still shimmered with lingering moisture. She stepped closer, her voice barely above the wind. "The spirits do not watch. They remember." He turned toward her, and for the first time since the crash, the endless weight of loneliness cracked. "Then maybe I'll let them remember me for a while." She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "You already live in their songs." In the days that followed, the world began to change. The rains didn't stop, they came again and again, carving new rivers through the dunes, filling dry valleys, awakening seeds buried for generations. The Thalren villages rebuilt, their banners no longer painted in the colors of war. Humans from the outer settlements began to arrive too, traders, envoys, skeptics, each wary but drawn by the rumor of peace. Elias watched it unfold with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Sometimes, when the storms passed, he'd climb the ridge and stare at the horizon where the spirit core's glow still pulsed faintly beneath the earth. He didn't claim to understand it, but he could feel its rhythm matching his own heartbeat. One evening, as the suns bled into the horizon, Kara joined him on the ridge again. She no longer wore armor, her markings had been repainted in white, the color of renewal. "The clans have chosen their council," she said. 3 from each tribe. Sereth will speak for the east. I will speak for the moons. They wish you to stay as bridge." Elias smiled. "That's a fancy word for translator." "No," she said softly. "It means path." He looked at her, unsure how to respond. "You think they'll keep this peace?" "No," she admitted. "But they will remember you when it breaks." They stood in silence for a while, watching the twin suns dip below the ridges. Elias finally said, "You ever think about leaving? Seeing what's beyond those stars?" Kara turned her head slightly. "Our myths say the first Thalran came from light that fell from the sky. Perhaps one day we will rise back to it." "Maybe I'll come back for you when we do," he said half-jokingly. She didn't smile. "You already did." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet stone. The world was quiet except for the distant hum of insects awakened by the rain. Elias closed his eyes, letting the sound settle into him. He didn't know what the future held, whether peace would last, whether humans would honor it, but for the first time, he didn't need to know. For the first time, he felt the world breathe with him. Days turned into weeks. When the signal ship finally arrived, sleek and silver against the red dawn, its shadow fell over the rebuilt canyon like a ghost from another life. The human envoy who stepped out wore polished armor and an expression of restrained curiosity. "Captain Elias Ward," the envoy said, saluting. "Command thought you were dead." Elias glanced at Kara beside him, her gaze sharp and protective. "So did I," he said. The envoy gestured toward the open ramp. "We're here to retrieve you. There'll be debriefs, inquiries. They want to know how you unified a hostile planet." Elias looked out across the canyon where Thalran children played in the rain. "Tell them I didn't. The planet unified itself." Kara stepped closer. "Will you go?" He hesitated, feeling the tug of both worlds pulling in opposite directions. "I have to," he said. "At least for a while. But I'll come back." She reached up and touched the side of his face, the gesture careful, deliberate, the mirror of his first mistake, now remade into something sacred. "Then when you return, you will find us waiting." He smiled softly. "Just don't start another war while I'm gone." She tilted her head. "Only the good kind." He turned toward the ship, the ramp glistening with condensation, the air humming faintly with the scent of home. As he stepped aboard, he glanced back one last time. Kara stood on the ridge, her cloak billowing in the wind, surrounded by her people. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the ramp lifted, sealing the view behind polished metal. Hours later, as the ship broke through the atmosphere, Elias watched the red planet shrink beneath him. The storm clouds shimmered with lightning, casting veins of gold through the darkness. He touched the small stone Kara had given him, the spirit mark, feeling its warmth through his glove. The voices of the past echoed faintly in his memory. "You are not chosen. You are remembered." He smiled to himself. Good enough. As the stars opened before him, he leaned back, eyes closing against the weight of everything he'd seen. Somewhere below, the rain continued to fall on a world learning to heal itself. Somewhere among those rains, his name had already become a story, of the human who touched a warrior's head, who moved the mountains, who turned blasphemy into peace. And maybe, he thought as sleep took him, that was enough.